Great. Good morning, everyone. My name is Michaela Morris. I'm the manager of Glaven Caring, which is a day centre for the elderly, Monday through to Fridays. And I'm the chair for this meeting and have been the chair for the face-to-face meeting last time and the online meeting the time before that. So a big welcome to everybody. My numbers say that there's at least 27 of us online, which is great to see so many people. Thank you so much. And you'll see that Caitlin and Alfina, as usual, are with us online and will be keeping us on track technically and in every other way. We also have Christine Footer, the chair of NorCA, with us today as well. So that's fantastic. Thank you all very much. I'll just pass back to Caitlin in case there's anything more in housekeeping that she needs to advise you about.
Lovely, thank you. I've just also got a few events to flag. NCC are having a Shaping the Market webinar, which is online on the 2nd of December. So that is a session on leadership in safeguarding. They're also holding some in-person workshops in November, I believe, starting next week. So there's 3 workshops on how care is commissioned. So they're really good ones to join. There's one being held in Norwich, one being held in King's Lynn, and one being held in Great Yarmouth. So hopefully you'll be able to attend one of those. And again, I will pop all of the details in the chat and how you can register for that. We're running our quarterly sector pulse survey again. You should hopefully be familiar with this from the last quarter, which then feeds into our intelligence report. It's a really quick survey, shouldn't take you more than 10 minutes, but we'd really appreciate if you could fill it out because it really helps us gain feedback from the sector. And then one last thing to flag, sorry, I'm bombarding you with lots of events, but the last one is a meeting online sort of webinar presentation that we're holding with the Department of Health and Social Care all about the Fair Pay Agreement. So they're going to come along and do a bit of a presentation on what it is, how it's progressing, how you can get involved, and hopefully sort of get a bit of feedback from providers. So I will pass over to our first speaker, who I believe I saw in the meeting earlier, which is Anna Fairhurst. Lovely. I will pass over to you for a bit of an update then.
I'm Anna Fairhurst and I'm the Senior Commissioning Manager in the Working Age Adult Commissioning Team at Norfolk County Council. I just wanted to give, and it's quite a whistle-stop update at the moment, just because I know there's been lots of questions around the direction of travel of Norfolk County Council when it comes to Working Age Adult Day Service. So I'll just run through some of that. There will be more information to follow, but just wanted to give you an update on where we're heading. So the first thing that I wanted to just discuss was around the new contractual framework for day opportunities. So we've had an agreement for us to move forward with our intentions to draft a new day service opportunities framework. So that's the Life Opportunities Framework. The last one came out in 2023, due for renewal in 2028. What we're hoping to do is bring this forward. So the new framework will be with us in 2027. So this will then replace the work that we've been undertaking regarding the contractual variations. So we contacted the market to ask around a number of variations that we wanted to include. And so instead of doing that, we're now going to bring out a new framework which will include those. The difference with this one is the intention is that it's going to be an all-age framework, so it'll also include older people, which hopefully will be good news for providers in that you will only then have one framework with one set of terms and conditions for day service provision. It's worth noting that all providers that will continue working with Norfolk County Council will be required to then tender successfully. What we're going to do is start to remove some of those older framework arrangements that we've got, and they will be decommissioned. We have got old frameworks that are still in place from kind of 1995, 2012, and they are very outdated now. So in terms of making sure that we've got an aligned set of terms and conditions, that's our intention. We are just working internally at the moment to make sure that we've got everything lined up that we need to bring that in place. But once that internal planning is complete, all key stakeholders, including providers, will be given opportunities to engage with that work. So we'll be really clear around what it is that framework's going to look like, what those key terms and conditions are, and how that will fit. Also, just to say, so similar to the current life opportunities framework, this will act as an overarching umbrella, and then it's likely that other lots can be added underneath. So if we're looking at expectations around particular delivery, so whether it's outreach or complex support, etc., they will then come on board underneath that framework. The other thing that we're looking to do is look at how we deliver day service in a different way. So this is part of a sort of transformation plan. We're really keen at looking at different ways of meeting Norfolk residents' needs, and we want to do that through a kind of testing process so that we can learn from different ways of working and working 100% collaboratively with providers. So what we want to do is meet with providers and we're going to start initially in the east, so within the Great Yarmouth area and wider. We're going to speak to providers and other stakeholders in that area. But what we want to do is actually say these are our key priorities that we need to meet, and actually how do you propose that we kind of meet that in terms of a day service delivery? So we really want to work collaboratively. Initially it will focus on learning disabilities and or autistic adults, but we'll be looking at that wider working age adult area as well, and concentrating specifically on those people where we potentially want a different level of delivery. We want to include looking at employment opportunities, how we build that independence for people, but also making sure that we've got that real sufficiency for those with the most complex needs. What we want to do is sort of trial and test some different ways of working. And if that's successful and we come up with a way that works, we then roll that out to other localities. I think really key to this is that we recognise there's different strengths and barriers actually to delivery on a geographical basis. So some of those challenges or some of those strengths that we'd see, say, in the Great Yarmouth area would be different to South Norfolk, North Norfolk, and again for Norwich and the West. So we really want to learn from that. There'll be lots more information with this, and the idea is that we're going to start that initial kind of provider alliance discussion with the Eastern area in January, and we'll let you know how you can be part of that and how you can feed into that process. So just to be clear around our long-term focus, there's some really key things that we're looking to make sure that we've got embedded in our day service provision. One thing we want to bolster is our prevention offer, so supporting people to increase their skills and independence where possible. We want to talk about enablement services and how that can be kind of fitted into our current provision. We would want to look at reduction of services where we can increase that short-term support with really key objectives so that people can be integrated into their local communities, and we'll be looking to day service provision to support with that. We want to make sure we've got sufficiency, so across all of Norfolk, so that we need build more local services to meet that demand, specifically focusing on those with really complex support needs. We've done a piece of work recently looking at how far people transfer and how long those transport journeys can be to meet the kind of provision that they need. And in some cases, you know, it's an incredible journey, sometimes over an hour. And then also continuing to strengthen our employment, so joining up with organisations and other stakeholders across Norfolk to kind of make sure that learning disabled people have the opportunities to get and retain paid employment. So we've done some work on this already, but we want to build on that. Bearing in mind, we've obviously got the Connect to Work offer that's happening within Norfolk County Council and a lot of other support systems in place. So how it joins together to make sure that we really have those successful outcomes for people. So that was a real whistle-stop tour of our intentions. As I said, there's going to be lots more information that will come. We are in the very early days of kind of deciding and designing what it is that we need. But I think the key message is that we are wanting to work with providers here. I think we really need to hear what those challenges are in terms of changing some of that delivery, how Norfolk County Council might need to change some of the stuff that we do to support that and build that flexibility in, and that there will be that opportunity to work with us. You know, we absolutely recognise that the expertise sits within our providers currently, so want to continue that kind of collaborative working as we go forwards. There'll be more information that comes out before Christmas around our intentions, and then that first provider alliance in the East will set up from January, and we'll start looking at how we shape what that looks like. Thank you.
So good morning, everybody. I'm Becky Brown. I'm the Market Development Manager within the Commissioning and Care Markets team at Norfolk County Council. So if I haven't met you before, hello, good morning. And I'm here today to talk to you about the annual fee review process. And I've got a couple of colleagues with me here today to help me along to do that. We've got some slides to share, but we'd also really welcome any of your own thoughts or questions as I go through the presentation. So same format is fine for me. So popping questions in the chat as we go, and we'll pause. So there's a couple of kind of natural pauses throughout this presentation. So please feel free to come in. We'll get the most out of this session from our perspective and hopefully yours, if we get as much engagement and conversation as possible. So we'll be really sort of engaging you to try and do that as we go through. So that was my introduction just very briefly. So I believe we should have Stephen today. Are you in the room metaphorically?
Yep, I'm here as well, Becky. I'm
Great.
Stephen Fell, one of the accountants at Norfolk County Council, supporting adult social care for their commissioning elements of the business.
Wonderful. And then we're also going to be working with or talking through with Anna, but you've already briefly just met Anna, so hopefully that's okay if we skip that introduction, and then we'll crack straight on with the slides. So let me cross my fingers and hope for the best. Fantastic. Okay, so we're going to start with Stephen. He's going to take us through just a few slides which summarise the wider financial and operating context that's relevant to this year's fee uplift process. We'll pause after those few slides for any questions that people have got specifically relating to finance and some of the announcements that are due to be made very shortly. And then Anna and I will continue by sharing some of the feedback from our most recent survey that we sent out to providers last month, which was asking lots of questions about organisations' current financial position, some of the workforce challenges also, and we'll be doing some bespoke analysis feedback for you and taking you through those slides and taking questions again at the end. So can everybody see the green screen? Wonderful. Yes, okay, so I'll hand over to Stephen to kick us off with the first few slides. Thanks, Stephen.
Yeah, just move to the next slide then, please, Becky. The first step I'm just going to go through is kind of like the context and the environment we're all operating in from local government view and the social care markets. The big thing to start with is the financial aspects, where over the last 8 years, adult social care in Norfolk has saved over £100 million in terms of costs for us as a department. And in the larger position for adult social care in Norfolk, annually we get about 40% of the savings target for the Norfolk County Council in total. So it's quite a significant chunk comes to the adult social care position. In 25-26, it was an additional 55 million was injected into the adult social care budget to kind of help with the pressures and demands of the service. Even with that injection, we're still having significant pressures put on the adult social care budget, and we're having to take actions to try and mitigate as much of that as possible in this current financial year and the future years going forwards. And the other part is, at the moment, we still haven't had the financial settlement for 26-27 from central government, so we're still having to work on predictive aspects on that. Into the economy side of things, so we know inflation is stabilised, but it's stabilised at quite a high rate still. As the slides will show later, that we're still tracking at about 3.8%, and the main contributors we're aware of is the energy, insurance, food, property maintenance costs, all still significantly higher than pre-pandemic levels, which is causing significant pressures. Alongside that, interest rates, even though they have been coming down, they're still higher than what we had seen before pre-pandemic levels. Again, cost of care or cost of living pressures are also coming into this as well, which is not just impacting everyday life for people, still impacting providers and what they're doing as well. There's an aging population, so it's one of the main things is that people are living longer. They're having more conditions than they used to have, which is obviously then putting extra strain on the care market in terms of being able to support those people. And it's just those complexity of needs and the right to services in the right time. And also that along with that, it's also about us trying to help reshape the market into the appropriate places because of the changing cohorts of people which are coming through on this area. We also have the point that there's choice and expectations from people, and what the Care Act obviously says we've got to abide by those sort of aspects, and it is about potentially having more home-based and community-led services over the sort of long-term traditional, which has been a bit more towards residential care sort of far side, but using more facilities where we can. We know the workforce is still a significant challenge, and even despite national and local initiatives to try and help stimulate that market and get additional workforce in place, that is still a big problem with high vacancies and turnover of staff, and retaining that skilled staff aspect as well. And we're also aware of the forthcoming employment legislation changes which are coming in April 2028. Care quality is improving in Norfolk, but we still at this moment in time are benchmarking poorly against our comparator areas, so we do need further progress in that field. And it's just that significant viability and sustainability from a financial area within the working age adult field and supporting living services. There's a lot of things for us to kind of take note of. So just moving on to the budget. This time last year, we had already had the autumn statement, so we were able to get a bit more of a clearer position. The autumn statement's not till next Wednesday, so there's still quite a few unknowns about this, and the accompanying policy statement's not been issued out to local authorities to understand how that's going to be looking. We're also in this position of this will be the first year in a long time that local government's going to get a multi-year settlement. So that's going to kind of give us an understanding what our financial position is going to be for not just 1 year, but several years, which does allow us to do better long-term planning. But with a lot of the pressures which central government are facing, we don't know what that's going to look like at this moment in time. So a lot of uncertainty for us. Based on the information what we have got and our predictions of what the funding envelope is likely to get, we are still facing a £62.5 million gap in Norfolk County Council's finances, and adult social care's saving element of that is 28 million for 26-27. The national living wage, again, the low pay commission has not told us what that value is going to be for the new financial year, so there is a range being predicted between £12.55 and £12.86. The Local Government Association has said to go for the median position, which is the £12.71, which is a 4.1% pay rise, as a sort of benchmarking thing for us to use at this moment in time. The other one which is a concern is the CPI. So as I said earlier, that is tracking at the moment at 3.8%. The Bank of England and central government's target is that 2%. The OBR predicted that this was going to be around the 2.3% in 26-27 back in May 2026. We are waiting for that to be published alongside the autumn statement information next week, to give us credence about what their predictions are for the new financial year on CPI. And the Fair Pay Agreement is out for consultation, so we know that's not going to be implemented until 2028. There's £500 million being set aside by central government for this. In terms of what that will be, how that will be split and everything else, we haven't been given confirmation of what Norfolk's share of that will be at this moment in time. But it is something on our radar. It's obviously something which has got to be brought into this position. Okay, the next slide. So we've kind of brought through here what the known drivers for cost are. So we know that the cost profile of providers is between 60-70% is salary based, and the other part is all the other costs of running the business. And the one thing we kind of want to demonstrate here is how the national living wage has increased since April 2016, and we can see that it has been increasing, especially over the last few years since the cost of living pressures really came into play and inflation really shot up. This really spiked the increase in the national living wage position, which we'll get into nearly 10% increases for a couple of years. Then last year it did drop down to just below 8%, whilst this year, as we said, predicted wise, we got 4.1% as the estimate, but we are waiting for a clarification on that. If we move on to the next slide as well, please, Becky. And the next part is about inflation and where CPI has sat over the years, and you can kind of see we've done this back to 1997, so it's that element of certain things when it's been kind of like outside of government's control to deal with has really spiked inflation. So the other times we saw spikes were back in the sort of when the credit crash with the bank, with the mortgages and things happening in 2008, kind of was the last time it really spiked. Before then, we then come to the war in Ukraine, where it really pushed up the inflationary aspect. It has dropped significantly since then, but we are aware it's still going on, with the fact that we still haven't got back down to that 2% where the government of England would like to be. So just to kind of give you that financial planning, the budget pressures for 26-27 are extremely challenging. They are every year very challenging, and it's getting harder and harder to kind of find these savings aspects, what we have been tasked to do. The uncertainty of the available funding and the lateness of the settlement makes some of the balancing the budget very difficult conversations. It's important for us to engage in these type of sessions to understand the market position. So when we're factoring in and modelling the projections of what things are, chief officers have got the right information to hand and know what to take to members for decisions on. And also to make sure that we are adhering to our Care Act duties. Once all of that sort of process has gone through and we understand the position, options will be then presented to members of what the best case scenario is, which will go to Cabinet in January 2026, before then being signed off by full council in February. But there will be a chance to obviously feedback on those projections. And yeah, it's about giving yourselves as much notice as we can on the fee uplift and what has caused us to offer what we've offered, and the way we have calculated that as well. So I think that is the last slide from me, Becky.
Okay, so that was a bit of a tour through some of the wider financial things that are happening at the moment, and just recognising that all of the information coming from central government this year in terms of how much money we can expect to come into local government is about a month later this year than it was last year. So if you'd come to the subgroups in November last year, we'd have come to that one with a bit more information about our spending power than we've been able to this time. So what we're doing, as Stephen mentioned, is modelling all the different possible scenarios for how we might be able to offer some uplift to fees for next year based upon what we know. And then that will shift and change as more announcements are made in advance of going to Cabinet in January. So it is really important that we come to these sessions, because the way I'm describing it is that it helps us form a really clear view of what the pressures are, the real life pressures are for providers, how you're seeing costs change over time, and then how we need to use that information to adapt our modelling, recognising that year on year there are changes, and in some years there's particular pressures in certain places, whether it's in inflation or last year the national insurance contributions rises. There's things that happen each time, and we just need to have a really clear view from all of as many different places as we can to understand that as well as we can. So that's really why we're here today. That's why we launched our survey last month, also called the Sector Pulse Survey. I think it's a bit of a trendy term at the moment. And thank you to anybody that did complete the survey. There were 24 questions. It was middle of October. We had the survey open for, I think, around 10 days, 24 questions, a mix of multiple choice and lots of opportunities for you guys to tell us more. So we received loads of qualitative type information, which just adds a lot of richness to our understanding. And this year we actually had an increase in the number of providers that completed the survey. So in total, we had 136 providers complete the survey, and 24 were specifically from day service providers, which was a couple less than last year, but it was still kind of in a similar region. And overall, the increase represented about a 5% increase in engagement compared to last year. So we were thankful for that. But if you aren't aware of this survey or haven't been able to complete it, then please do sort of bear it in mind. We tried to do as much publicity as possible. Our NorCA colleagues helped us with that this year, so thank you to those. And we'll more than likely be doing this process again in October next year. Just very briefly, the benefit of doing this type of survey year on year is that we can start to see those comparisons and be able to use that data to show change. It also allows us to connect it to the national picture. So these questions were actually pulled together from the Care England Sector Pulse Survey, where they produced the national analysis. And we've always found that really useful intelligence, but it wasn't quite bespoke enough for us to understand whether that was reflective of Norfolk providers. So the year-on-year comparison is just adds extra value to all of this. So maybe put a marker in your calendar for next year for October time to be able to see this come out if you haven't completed it already. Oh, I'm going backwards. Okay, so I've got a couple of slides before I hand over to Anna, but like I said before, pop things in chat if you've got questions as we go. So this first section just really gives you an overview from a day opportunities perspective who completed the survey this year. And it's important that we get the right people to complete the survey because we ask for really specific information about finance and total operating costs. And the more precise information that we receive back coming from the right places, it obviously adds a layer of assurance that we're getting the right information. So you can see that we had 33% were chief execs, 21% were owners, 17% senior managers, and the remaining was split between MDs and other executive directors. So it does give you a flavour, hopefully, that that it's the right kinds of people completing the survey with the right levels of information. And from an organisation size perspective, most organisations who completed the survey employed between 10 and 49 people. So that was about 46% of the total, or those slightly smaller organisations that were employing between 1 and 9 people. Across to the right, you can see how that translates into the numbers of people that were supported by the organisations that completed over the past 12 months. So around 4% just supporting 10 to 24 people, and that ranges up to 17% supporting between 100 and 249 people. And again, a real mix in terms of how many volunteers organisations have that make up the total of the workforce for individual places. So 33% of organisations saying that they don't have any volunteers at all, but then up to 21% that actually had more than 30% of their total workforce represented as volunteers. So that's the who completed the survey. The next couple of slides are on finances. So this is really important for us to be able to understand what these splits are of total operating costs. The reason it's so important is because we use these for individual sectors, or we use various bits of information to help build our modelling for how we're going to look at how we uplift fees year on year. We use different forms of evidence. We use things like previous cost of care exercises, procurement exercises, day-to-day intelligence that we gather as part of commissioning colleagues, but also things like these surveys. And this gives us an indication, again, over time, how these sort of bundles of costs are changing and how they're representing more or less of your total operating position. So this year for day services, we were told that around 67% of staffing costs, were related to staffing costs, and 33% were non-staff costs. We see quite a variation, as you'd expect, between different sectors, and even within sectors, we see quite big variations because of the different models that you all use as part of your own businesses, but it gives us a good benchmark. And just, I guess, in terms of helping for some context and comparison, the Local Government Association, when they provide advice and guidance around modelling for fees, they use about a 70-30 split across all sectors. In Norfolk, we have a slightly more nuanced modelling because we've done this work over the years to try and understand it, but this is a really helpful positioning for us to see how it changes. So maybe that'll be one of the things that you could reflect on slightly, just to make sure that whether this feels about right to you. And then my last slide is a slide that was looking at how staffing costs and non-staff costs have changed over the last 12 months. So this was looking back. Can you tell us about how these things have felt for you? And from a staff-related expenses, 54% this year told us that staff-related expenses have increased significantly. So that's more than 5% in the last 12 months, and that's a 16% increase on last year. Now, we know that there were some big changes last year. I mentioned before about employers' national insurance contributions, but more broadly, we're hearing that there are various things that are adding to those pressures in staff-related expenses, including things like recruitment and retention challenges. And 33% reported that costs had increased slightly. So that's that 1 to 4.9%, which was 26% less than last year. From non-staff related expenses, 58% of providers told us again that those costs had increased significantly in the last 12 months. That's 11% less than last year, and 38% reported that costs had increased slightly, which is a 7% increase. So just a general quick view from that, from my perspective, is it feels as though from day services perspective, those staffing pressures are being felt most acutely in terms of the biggest pressure, but non-staff related expenses still remaining high and significant. The top 3 cost pressures, we had a big drop down list and providers could tick as many as they wanted to. But the ones that came up repeatedly at the top of those lists were workforce related costs, utility bills and rents and mortgages. That remained the same as to last year. So those top 3 were the top 3 from last year, but the ones that I've included in bold below are ones that were right up the top, very close to those other ones, which didn't appear as strongly last year. So things like insurances, food costs and building maintenance costs were right up there too. We then asked providers, how are you managing these cost pressures? What are some of the ways that you're dealing with this in the best ways that you can? And the top 3 remain the same. So internal efficiency savings, utilising reserves and curbing investment, even though it was in the top 3 last year, represented a higher proportion this year. And the one that I added as a 4th this year, again, came up really strongly, was after those 3 things at the top, was staff redundancies, was showing as a higher proportion. We asked organisations to tell us, are you currently operating in a surplus position or a deficit position? And 42% said that they're operating in a surplus position. That was an 8% increase from last year. And 50% said that they were operating in a deficit position. That was a 2% increase. And 8% decided to not be able to either tell us or not provide an answer. And then the final point on this slide was For providers who are operating in a surplus position, we wanted to know, how is that changing? So 38% of providers reported a surplus financial position that had decreased significantly in the last 12 months, and 8% of providers reported that position that had decreased slightly in the last 12 months. Okay, without further ado, let me hand over to Anna, who's going to take you through some of the more qualitative information that sat alongside these multiple choice questions.
Thank you. Okay, so I think we thought it'd be really helpful just to go through some of those individual queries that we had and the comments, which is where the kind of local approach really helps. So the excluding costs relating to the national living wage, how have your organisation's staff-related expenses changed in the last 12 months? So this is giving us a bit more of a breakdown of what those key issues are. So we're looking at pay pressures and maintaining pay parity. So providers reported that pay uplifts needed to retain staff and remain competitive locally. And also, I think we've heard a lot around those pay differentials. So people having to increase budgets outside of that to keep those roles separate have risen significantly. And several note that these increases are now exceeding the uplifts that are applied to fees. So some individual comments that we had around that was that we had to increase wages by 8.3% just to match local competition. We've been forced to increase staff pay significantly to retain quality staff, but fee increases have not kept pace. No wage increase for several years as budget will not allow. And we needed to increase wages above minimum wage to keep the grade differences. So that's really helpful feedback. And then looking at national insurance and wider staffing related cost pressures. So those changes to employer national insurance contributions are widely described as a major driver of rising staff costs. And providers also highlighted increases in skilled worker visa costs, life insurance premiums and other employment overheads. And some of the comments around that was that the national insurance contributions alone equated to an additional 5 million for us, which hasn't been recovered through uplifts. National insurance, visa costs and higher wage offers to retain staff are all driving costs up. And the national insurance increase and national living wage rise together means a 10.4% increase in staff costs. And then the third one under there was around rising costs linked to training, recruitment and workforce development. So this came through really strongly. Many providers report that significant increases in training, recruitment and workforce related costs, specialist and in-person training, particularly linked to delegated healthcare tasks and mandatory requirements, has become more expensive. And providers also highlight rising recruitment, onboarding and in some cases agency costs. So some of those key comments that we received were around training has become a lot more expensive. Mandatory courses like Oliver McGowan Tier 2 are now quoted at a very high cost. We've moved more courses back into in-person training and quality costs. Increased training costs due to higher number of people with complex needs. So I think there's something we definitely need to pick up here around those training requirements where they're mandatory and otherwise, and how we can kind of support with that. But that was really helpful feedback. So non-staff related expenses, so rising utilities, compliance and operating costs. We had consistent reports that increases across core non-staff operating costs, including utility, insurance, compliance related services and essential contracts. Even where providers have switched suppliers or secured better rates, they still remain high. And those some of those particular comments where everything continues to be more expensive across the board, such as various contractors that are health and safety requirements, fire, waste collection, etc. We've seen a 70% increase in food costs since 2022. Insurance continues to rise at quite a pace, to the point it almost seems untenable if rising similarly over time. And utilities such as gas and electricity continue to be a real concern. We've changed provider in the last 12 months, and whilst we're on a better rate, we don't appear to be benefiting. And then looking at the property costs and other inflationary pressures, and technologies included in this, non-staff cost pressures also include increased rent and occupancy costs alongside the financial impact of digital care, planning systems and other essential technology investments. We've had to invest in care planning tech for safety and quality, but it's put a real strain on the budget. CPI has stayed higher than expected, and that hits all our non-payroll costs. Everything has gone up. There's nothing left to trim back without impacting care. And borrowing costs have gone up by more than 60% since 2022, just to maintain buildings that are fit for care. Thank you. So we then looked at a question that says, has your organisation considered exiting the market in the past 12 months? And we had 28% of providers who completed the survey had said that they had considered exiting the market. And this was attributed to rising staffing costs and insufficient funding from local authorities. So that's impacting financial viability. New employment legislation is expected to increase costs further, making operations more challenging, low profit margins, increasing the complexity of need without aligned funding, especially when closing sites or reducing capacity. It would impact people with more complex needs, and a dependence on external fundraising or diversification to remain viable. And I think this is, we do see this a lot from our charity sector are reporting that that's a huge pressure. Just to say that 28%, that was an 11% increase when we compare that to 2024. So that is significant. It's not a surprise to see that, given what I know and how close I am to the market, but that's a really difficult picture. Thank you. So how can Norfolk County Council and providers work together differently to mitigate or minimise the financial challenges or additional costs we face in the coming year? So looking at financial challenges and sustainability, providers emphasise the need for fee rates and uplifts that match real cost drivers, ensuring sustainability and to avoid those ongoing shortfalls. Calls for a standard fair rate and uplifts aligned to inflation and rising staff costs. And some charities highlight how current assumptions don't reflect fundraising contributions that mask underlying deficits. And then looking at collaboration and communication, providers are asking for clearer strategic direction, earlier engagement and more meaningful co-production, particularly around commissioning models, fees and service expectations. Emphasis on shared forecasting, joint problem solving and collaborative sector-wide planning, and the desire for clearer communication on future commissioning intentions, service types and demand. And I think this is really helpful in terms of me shaping how we go forwards with some of the work that we're doing, how we engage and how we kind of really embed that collaborative approach. So it was really welcome to see those comments. Moving on to payments, referrals and responsiveness, providers highlight issues with referral flow, suitability and the balance between services, the need for fairer distribution of referrals, so some are at capacity while others struggle. I think that's an interesting one, and I think that's something that we probably want to pick up. If people are having less referrals, maybe we need to discuss why that could be. So I'm hoping that as we move forward with some of this provider alliance work, we can be really clear that actually we're developing services that are what our social work teams want to commission. So I think there's something in that we can explore. Calls to refer more suitable people, not people who require services the provider cannot deliver. I wasn't aware that was a situation, so that's really interesting to hear. And concerns that lower and consistent referrals lead providers to draw on reserves, and suggestions that early support and appropriate funding reduce crisis costs later, which is absolutely key. And then looking at sustainability, providers have emphasised the need for a more trusting and respectful partnership where Norfolk County Council recognises the scale of provider challenges. Suggestions for Norfolk County Council to support reduced cost training and bulk procurement. And I think that is a really key theme that's come out, so it's something we'll have to take away. Suggestions for Norfolk County Council to support reduced, we've done that one. Requests to streamline payment processes and speed up payment contract turnaround. So there's been lots of work that's been happening in that area, and I have heard that there's been an improvement. So it'd be interesting to know, where there are still issues with that. It would be great for those to be fed through to me so we can pick up on those issues. And a desire for Norfolk County Council to acknowledge providers' role in prevention, independence and community value, which is really key. So looking at workforce, the top three workforce related costs were the increase in national living wage, increases to employers' national insurance contributions and training costs. I don't think there's any surprises in there. The top three recruitment and retention challenges are pay rates within social care, the challenging nature of work in social care and poor perceptions of social care as a career, which is all key points. So staff shortages, what measures have been taken due to staff shortages? So there's an increase in agency usage, increasing pay, which obviously is impacting on those issues, offering flexible working and turning down new admissions, which is a terrible outcome really. Average hourly pay, care staff reported, so £13.55 per hour. 54% of providers answered yes to whether they aligned wage increases to the percentage increase in the national living wage.